All right, guys, today I want to talk about something that's been on my heart a little bit lately. I've had lots of just different things that have been coming up in my own life, different things I've been listening to, and this is something that I think a lot of us struggle with, and that is this idea of how technology is like truly impacting us. And I know that we talk about this in so many different regards, but I really do think that when we're talking about specifically nervous system dysregulation, so we know there's a book that came out recently that's called The Anxious Generation, and it's really great. It's a really great book. It talks about how like this generation of kids, like why they're so anxious. And a lot of it is because of specifically social media, but they also talk about technology use and in all of that stuff. But I also think that part of that is the lack of also like true, authentic connection, community, things that we used to have. And I really, really do think that that is such a huge thing for so many of us that we are connecting online, which is wonderful. And I run a business online. I am not here to bash the internet, technology, social media, like any of those things. But I do think that with everything in life, it's really important to know, to be aware, right? Be aware of what's going on, what it's doing. We also know that it creates a really great dopamine hit for us. The likes, the comments, internet scrolling, the games, like they're designed to get you addicted, which has to do with our dopamine in our brain. And so I just think that it's very, very imperative to be aware of that because we want the best for ourselves. And so many of us are so dysregulated right now. So we talk about this a lot on the podcast about nervous system dysregulation and why having a regulated nervous system is so important. So I want to talk about that first so you kind of know why this is a big conversation. When our nervous system is dysregulated, and that means your brain is constantly scanning your environment for everything that is dangerous, scary, threatening, negative, like could be some sort of threat to you. And in the past, that was a wild animal, that was, that was a bear outside the cave. But now it is not that same thing anymore. It could be urgency culture, perfectionism, people pleasing, but it also can be this idea of social media and fear on social media and comparison and cyberbullying and FOMO, even like fear of missing out and feeling left out. I think we all can agree at this stage in the game that social media does impact us all in certain ways. Some of it positive and amazing to see old connections and old friends and be able to keep up with people that we might have for sure lost touch with, but also, people getting new houses, new cars, going on vacation, their kids are doing different things, they're looking different, their bodies, like there are, I think, points for every single one of us where we have compared ourselves to something on social media. And I don't know, I've talked about this briefly and I don't want to, talk about this a ton, but if you have not listened to Chalene Johnson's Patreon podcast in the rise and fall of the Hollises, it is really, really good. And it talks about like if you follow them or not, I still think even if you don't even know who that is, it is a really, really great conversation. She did 11 deep dives into this, and it talks about like basically their rise and fall to fame, and it talks about addiction, and it talks about love, and it talks about divorce, and it talks about personal identity, and it talks about social media and influencers and entrepreneurs and businesses. Like so many of these things, we all can look at this horrific situation and sort of get some, I think, ideas about what's going on the internet, on social media, what we see, what we don't see, all of those things. And so, I thought this would just be a great conversation today because I do think that so many women are feeling stressed and anxious and overwhelmed, and we're not sleeping well, partly because of the blue light with technology. Technology is doing no favors for our sleep for sure. And those are all symptoms that I treat and work with women all the time. So when our brain feels like there's this threat in our life, and like I said, it's not the wild animal outside the cave anymore. It's these things that are keeping us feeling in fear, right? So fear is like this root thing, fear of being found out, fear of authenticity, fear of vulnerability, fear of shame, fear of not being good enough, fear of not being successful enough, whatever the thing is for you, fear of not being productive enough. I've worked with enough people now and have also struggled with several of these things in my own life that I understand this. And these are the things. So I think when we feel really anxious or feel dysregulated, like we're overwhelmed and stressed and snappy and irritable with our family, and we have all that cortisol and adrenaline running, a lot of it is, if we really start peeling the layers off, there's some fear there. And so when your brain feels fear, it will start to give you stress chemicals, cortisol, adrenaline, like I mentioned, to keep you safe. And it'll say, okay, great, we have a system for this. If this doesn't feel like a really calm, content, peaceful, safe situation, we will give her some stress hormones or chemicals to combat this and help her through this. And the thing is, that's wonderful. We want that system. We don't want to turn it off. But it's, in fact, I always tell my patients, it is literally like you are over functioning and like functioning perfectly versus this thing that you want to fight and get rid of, right? We don't want to get rid of that system. It's like a fire alarm in our kitchen. So we have the fire alarm in our kitchen, and it's always ready to go off, whether we burn the toast, whether we have a full-fledged fire, anything in between. It doesn't sound different. It just goes off to say, hey, something's not right here. You need to figure this out. And the same goes for our life. When we start to get into this fight or flight response and whatever symptoms that looks like, or anxiety or overwhelm or snappiness, irritability, the same thing is true. It is your brain hypervigilantly alerting you, hey, something isn't right here. And it is up to you to figure out what that something is. In the book, Building a Non-Anxious Life, another really, really great book by Dr. John Delany, he talks about several categories, like 6 or 7 categories, on why people's fire alarms are going off. And one of them is actually connection. And so I think that that's like a really great thing that we kind of talk about with the social media thing of like, we are very connected right now, but is it true, authentic connection? Is it so he actually said something in an interview recently that I thought was amazing. It is basically friends or people you do not have to perform for. And that can be online or in person. I know even in person, we have certain groups of people right at work or in our kids' sports teams or at the school functions with the other moms or whatever the case may be. We tend to, possibly, maybe not all of us do this, but at certain points we tend to have to kind of put on this hat for ourselves to kind of fit into the social norms and almost like perform, right, for the crowd that we're in front of. And so that's fine, and that's all socially acceptable, and we have to do that sometimes, but we also need people that we do not have to perform for, that we can take everything off, all the layers, and like be our authentic self. That is true belonging, and belonging is actually a human need. And if we don't have that belonging, that true social connection, your fire alarm in your brain is going to be going off. And so I think that is a place where we need to really evaluate social media, because I too have a lot of really wonderful, like, friends, colleagues, have connected with wonderful, wonderful people online. And I wouldn't change that for the world. Some of my best friends are like online friends. But you just want to make sure that you're being your authentic self, that you can kind of lay it all out there for people. And it doesn't have to be everybody, obviously, but you should have a couple few people in your life that is a possibility for you. And your nervous system will start to calm down in that regard. So we talk about this in terms of hormones as well. So when your hormones are, or when your stress hormones are constantly on, your brain's really hypervigilant, you're constantly in sort of like this stress response or this fight or flight, over time, that's going to impact everything for our body, right? Because this is like a survival mechanism. And so things like digestion, our brain chemistry changes, our inflammatory markers change, our immune system changes, your progesterone gets lower, your testosterone, your DHEA. We start to have hormonal imbalances from this thing called your fight or flight response, or the stress hormones that we're producing. And so I talk about this all the time with perimenopause and sleeplessness and irritability and anxiety and even like skin issues, digestive issues, focus issues. Like there's so many things that I talk about this with, because if cortisol and adrenaline, remember, those are two of the three of our master hormones, insulin's the other one. If those two things are not in a good place most of the time, at least, again, fight or flight's inevitable. We're all going to be in it, not a big deal. But if we're constantly living our life in that, you are going to have hormonal imbalance symptoms. There's just no way to avoid it. If your body is trying to protect you all the time, that it's going to be digesting great and your immune system's going to be great, and your periods and your energy and your mood and your sleep, all of that stuff has the potential to not feel very good. And so when we even talk about perimenopause and this natural sort of like hormonal fluctuation into menopause where we decline and lose estrogen, I think it's imperative that we don't forget the conversation about what is going on in your life. Are you burning the candle at both ends? Are you exhausted? Are you constantly stressed out? Are you constantly fearful that you're going to be found out? Do you have connection? Are you financially secure? Is your health secure? Do you have good relationships? Like, these things are vital for our hormones in general, all 50 of them plus, 50 plus of them, to be in a good place. And so I always, always, always ask all of my one-on-one patients, how is life going? How are you feeling? Are there big things going on? How's your mental health? Like, all of that is vitally important, even in the conversation of perimenopause when our hormones are naturally all over the place. So I just want to encourage you guys to really look at that. So I want to talk about some of the reasons that I think technology kind of creates some nervous system dysregulation. So number one, I think that our brains, and there's a lot of research on this, have not really evolutionarily caught up to this like constant stream of information, notifications, and updates. And I think, you have your phone with like ding, 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 and notification and text message, and other people's urgency can create our own. And I know, certain people like can have no notifications on their phone, like that red little bubble stresses them out. These are things that are so small, but are sort of like, I call it the stress reservoir, right? So we have like this reservoir, and like thing after thing after thing after thing goes in there. Yes, it might seem insignificant, but it is something that's going into that stress reservoir continuously. So I want you to really look at how much you're spending on social media or the news outlets or the internet in general. What do your notifications look like? Can we turn some off and only get notified on certain things instead of every single thing? Every app developer thinks that their app obviously is the most important, and you need to know the notifications like games and social media and all those things. You probably don't need to get every single notification. And so I encourage you to go into at least certain apps and turn off notifications so that you're just not being bombarded every single time that there's some sort of notification. I also think like the rapid fire nature of social media and technology, of like everything now, can really train our brains to seek instant gratification and quick rewards. And this can lead to a reduced attention span and difficulty with focus, and can obviously further contribute to nervous system dysregulation. I myself always tell people this. So in college, you guys, before social media was a big thing, before we got on our smartphones all the time, I didn't even have a smartphone in college, or until even several years after college now at this point. And Instagram wasn't what it was, Facebook, like you didn't have it on your phone, all of those things. And so when I was in college, like I could sit in a library and with like even just like a little bit of caffeine, like a Diet Coke at that point or a Red Bull, I could sit there and focus for like 12 hours. And I never had any sort of focus issues or anything like that. And now I have noticed that with the more, year after year of using this, that my attention span and focus has gotten progressively worse, for sure. I don't feel like I can work as long and as focused diligently as I used to be able to. And the instant gratification of like needing stuff now, I think ChatGPT is amazing. I think it further does that for us though. I think that really contributes to some of this like lack of focus, like feeling like a squirrel brain. I myself am looking at my computer right now and have about 8 tabs open for things. I think that is contributing to our reduced attention span. I also think, obviously we talked about this a little bit earlier, but comparison and self-esteem. I think even though I think by now we all know social media is not real. And to the level, like being in this industry, to the level that it is not real is like astounding. And I think it's something that maybe people outside of this industry don't really know, don't really think about. But when you're in this industry, and like I said, go listen to Chalene Johnson's Patreon podcast about the rise and fall of Rachel Hollis and Dave Hollis, because that was another big one. And she talks about it consistently with like influencers and grifters, and certainly not all influencers are bad and are grifters and opportunistic people, for sure. I have friends that are wonderful, wonderful people that are influencers, but you also have to remember, you guys, that they are posting stories on Instagram are 1 minute long in clips. You're getting like this teeny tiny little bit of their day. And even though we consciously can say like, we know this isn't real, it is sometimes very, very hard. In a conversation that my best friend and I have had numerous times about, you can't believe everything you see on there. And sometimes there's like these alter egos happening or that sort of thing. And even if there's not, and everyone, is super authentic in what they post on social media, and I myself really, really try to be very open and authentic and truthful on social media so that I don't contribute to that, because I think it's hard anyways to kind of sift through that. But still, for me, you guys are getting a teeny tiny portion of my day, and you don't see everything. And I don't think that I have anything to hide. You could put a camera in my house and watch my whole day if you wanted to, but I just want you to remember that social media is not real. You cannot believe what you see on social media, no matter who you're following, 100%. Everyone's putting their best foot forward. And even the people who are putting there's trends in social media, right? So like, now we're at this trend where people like don't want super edited videos and want to be a little bit more real and see like the real deal and not so performative. And so creators will say, cool, that's what we're going for, but it's still curated. We went through this phase. And in fact, I think this is why Rachel Hollis got so popular, because she was one of the first people to be super vulnerable and really relatable, but yet a really successful entrepreneur and woman. But she was talking about the marriage problems. She was talking about the body image problems and marital issues and kids and all the things. She was talking about all of it. However, a lot of that was curated imperfection, right? We can curate imperfection to be relatable to people on the internet. And so I just encourage you, no matter what you're watching or listening to or whatever, please be very conscious about not comparing yourself to anybody's life on social media, because I promise you, there's a whole side to everyone's story that you're not seeing. And that I don't mean, not bad or anything like that, but we know through the book, The Anxious Generation, all the research that has come out. Research is about 10 to 15 years behind things. So we're, right around the time Instagram, Facebook came out now, a little bit later. We have the research that shows that constantly looking at social media and comparing yourself really negatively contributes to poor self-esteem and really increases the risks of anxiety and depression for women my age, women older, and certainly for kids whose brains haven't developed and haven't had the perspective yet either. Um, disrupted sleep patterns is another one. So when we look at blue light, right? So screens, computers, TVs, tablets, all of those things, that blue light emitting through there suppresses the production of melatonin. It tells your brain, hey, it's daytime. And that will obviously impair your sleep-wake cycle, which will impair sleep quality and therefore your energy the next day. So I encourage really to make sure that you are using blue light blocking glasses is just an absolute must. And then also, really aiming for a few reasons, but for this reason alone, to get off of your tablets and phones and things like that, specifically in your bed, which I get it. And I'm going to be totally transparent here. This is one of my toughest things in terms of health and wellness and all that stuff. I can eat the healthy food. I can strength train. I can walk. This is the hardest one because it's addictive, right? It plays on that dopamine. We're all exhausted. Women by the end of the night, numbing out, feels so nice. Kind of going into this alternative universe feels nice. Get your phone out of your bed. That is like your safe haven, and you have no idea when you open the phone, the internet in general, what you're going to see. You might find like the biggest trigger for you ever, and it might ramp up your nervous system so that you're awake then for 3 more hours. It might, set the comparison trap. I think that when we scroll, right, we're just getting like content after content after content after content. And some of it might be really funny. Some of it might be really fear mongering. Some of it might be really comparison traps. Some of it might be triggers for whatever reason. Some of it might be really thought provoking, which is not always a bad thing. But again, do we want to do that right before bed when we're supposed to be sleeping well? Sometimes that can contribute. And then, just a couple other things. I mean, I think obviously social pressure, I think this has contributed to women's sort of like mental load a ton, like the Pinterest birthday parties and, other moms just comparing themselves, like I said, to their highlight reels and things like that. That's just something that like our moms, our other generations just didn't have. And I think moms are more burnt out than ever. And so, you have to kind of wonder if there's this correlation there of, is this actually helping moms? I think to some extent it absolutely can. There's a lot of places that there's support groups online, which is great. You don't have to leave your house. Solidarity and talking to and connecting with people who are going through a similar thing to you is absolutely invaluable. I have used it through my business journey, health and wellness, through being a mom, when I had babies, breastfeeding information, like so much of it is good. And that's the thing. I'm not saying like all or nothing, right? I'm not saying it's all good or all bad. It's not. There's millions of accounts on Instagram. Some are great, some are not. It depends on you and your triggers, those types of things. And so it's up to us to be really, really self-aware of how is this making us feel, right? So I don't follow a lot of health and wellness accounts anymore because I didn't want to get my message confused and like, not even confused, I guess, but like everyone starts to sound the same, right? And so I try not to look at other people's accounts because I don't want to start getting like their content in my head and start saying the same things. And so I really try to not look a lot at that stuff because it just makes my own authentic message better, I think. And I also, it just makes us like a squirrel. We're like, oh yeah, what about that? Or what about that? And I think, the confusion and misinformation over so many topics, right? But even just within hormones and perimenopause, like part of the confusion and overwhelm is that you're following a lot of people who might be uneducated on the topic, and they're just sort of regurgitating bits of information from other people and things like that. And that's where you get confused, is because you're not necessarily listening to reputable sources all the time, which is a whole other thing of like what's true, what's not, what's reputable, what's not, especially with the introduction of AI. It's a little bit tougher now to even do that. And so I think that, you just have to be careful and really, really self-aware of yourself and how it's making you feel, what you're listening to, who you're following, all of those different things. And then obviously like one other little area of this is more like the sedentary lifestyle, right? So when we're on technology and screens all the time, like that typically means that we're not moving. Although I will say a lot of people will only let themselves scroll when they are on their walking pad or listen to podcasts when they're walking. I've seen lots and lots of comments about that on like certain people's podcasts on Patreons and things like that, where they are like, oh, great, the episode dropped. Now we can go walk. Right. And so I think that is all great, like all freaking fantastic. But I think the moral of the story here is that I do feel like this is an area of a lot of women's dysregulation. And like I said, when we're dealing with such an epidemic with hormonal imbalance things, you know, we talk about like environmental toxins, we talk about food quality, we talk about standard American diet, we talk about lack of nutrients. But we have to talk about nervous system regulation. And under this huge umbrella of nervous system dysregulation, we have to figure out for each woman, like why your nervous system is dysregulated. Where are you feeling fear in your life, inadequacy, urgency? Maybe you're buying into toxic productivity. Maybe there's marital issues. Maybe there's extended family relationship issues. Maybe you feel like you don't have a close person that in the middle of the night, if something happened to you or your family, that you could call. Maybe financially, you don't feel super secure. Maybe your health doesn't feel super secure. Maybe, you're putting too much just societal pressure on yourself. There's all kinds of reasons that women feel this way that's contributing to just this, literally your brain thinking that you're in this burning building. And so that's something that I work on with every single one of my patients. I always, always, always ask them, no matter what age or what they're coming to me for, like, how is life going? What's going on at school for my teenage girls and, extracurricular activities? What's going on as a parent in your marriage? What's going on in your work environment? Are you more type A, perfectionistic, people-pleasing type of a person? I will say, as somebody who is very type A and perfectionistic and puts a lot of internal pressure on myself, social media is very triggering in that regard. And so for those of you who are not that way and kind of let things roll off your back a little bit easier, you might do a little bit better there. But as somebody who is just wired to be a little bit more anxious and struggles with some of those things, like I have to be probably more conscientious than some of my counterparts that are not like that. And also, like I kind of alluded to earlier, you can train your algorithm. So if certain topics, right? So like for me with environmental toxins and the sort of like non-toxic life people, that can be really triggering to me. Like I know all the information and I have been open about this. In acupuncture school, it was my worst because I was just learning and I was kind of new to all this information and I was scared to death of everything. I was making my own personal care products, my foods, like I was really scared. And we all know that fear, right, creates this nervous system dysregulation. So this thing where I was trying to be really healthy was actually contributing to really poor mental health for me. And so over the last, 12, 13 years, I've like really walked myself back from that and found a better happy medium where I'm aware of it. I try my best, but I also recognize that like, we can't, I don't homestead. I'm going to be exposed to some things, some plastics, some things like that. And it just kind of is what it is. I try to support my body in terms of nutrients and detoxing and those types of things. But I just think that, like, for example, that would be triggering to me. So I don't follow any of those people that just want to scare you about food and chemicals and things like that. Like that's just super unhelpful to me. And so I think for you got to figure out what's unhelpful to you. If it's bodybuilders or marathon running, and that's not something that you do anymore, but you used to do it. That was a trigger for me for a while too. It's not now because I'm super comfortable in it. I know what I'm doing and I feel good about things, but body image, clothes, finances, people with like really, really nice houses that look perfectly curated all the time. And you're living with, a bunch of boys and it's a mess all the time. I can relate to that very well too. You just gotta, the moral of the story here is that for nervous system regulation and thereby trying to balance hormones, trying to calm down your stress response, we have to start being aware of how things are making us feel. Where is this coming from? It's coming from somewhere. I have a lot of patients who do like Dutch testing or cortisol testing and things like that. And if their cortisol is either high or low, like we're digging in. I'm not just giving a supplement and saying like, oh yeah, cool, just take this ashwagandha for your cortisol or whatever. I'm asking, why is this like this? And I give them, they don't know why it's like this, but I give them, where's the stress coming from? What are you doing in your life? When are you drinking caffeine? What's your sleep like? When are you on screens? Like, we got to start digging into this stuff if we're going to start feeling our best in terms of energy, mood, sleep, periods, digestion, mental clarity, focus, inflammation, immune system regulation, how our joints and muscles feel. Like, all of this stuff is so interconnected. And I think we in our society try to like separate it so much that we sort of think about it as piece by piece, but I promise you from the bottom of my heart, it all goes together. So I hope this was helpful for you guys and just something to just ponder, right? I want you to just on your own ponder these things about your relationship with technology and or where is this stress coming from? And when you know, that's when you can start to change, right? We can't change what we don't know. And so I try to just give topics regularly that we can start to kind of look at in our own life and say like, oh, interesting. Okay, this is an area for me that I could be better at. And I will tell you guys, social media and the internet is constantly a thing in my household with my kids, with myself, that we are it's always an evolving situation, always. Sometimes, I'll get the phone and charge it in the bathroom, and then somehow inevitably it sneaks back, and I'm like, dang it, here we are again. Got to go back to charging it in the bathroom. Got to go back to really looking at notifications. Got to go back to who's on my Instagram algorithm. All of those different things with my kids too. How are you acting when you get a couple hours of the Switch? Is it good, bad? What games are we playing? How are you acting and feeling when you watch YouTube? And that's up to us as parents to really monitor that and look at that, because the research is out there, guys. It's out there for all of us. It's plain and clear. We have to just kind of look at it now. So anyways, I hope this was helpful for you guys. If this was, please share it with a friend or family member that might be struggling with some of these things that we talked about today as well. And as always, I'll be back next week.